Hey Guru Nation, so what you're about to see is me sitting down with two of our CRA Academy interns going through a monitoring report, an interim monitoring visit report. This is what we do with all of our interns who visit us in California after the CRA Academy, after they successfully completed the CRA Academy. It's optional, but some students choose to come out here and we get to go through these kind of things. So the full episode, the full audio of it is on Random Musings from the Clinical Trials Guru. It's a podcast on iTunes, Google Play, Stitcher, wherever else they have podcasts. Episode 81, but just wanted to give you a little snippet for YouTube. So hopefully you enjoy, and I'll see you soon. So when I first go to a site, what I do, the first thing I do, if it's an interim monitoring visit, I look at the regulatory binder. Okay, I don't care what order the monitoring report has everything. I do the regulatory binder first. And the reason I do that is to look at any protocol amendments.
Okay, I did that then. I wasn't too off.
Yeah, that was good. Protocol amendments, changes to the delegation of duties log. You guys remember a delegation log? Very important. The most important form is the 1572. So that's the one that gets filed with the FDA from every site. And it's basically the contract between the PI and the FDA. That the study is their responsibility and no one else's. So that's the first thing I do when I go to site. I look at any amendments. I'll know beforehand if there's been an amendment. But what I'm looking for is, did the site file the new protocol amendment? Did the PI sign the protocol amendment signature page? Did they train the staff on the amendment? That's often the biggest finding, is that they haven't. And there's a training log in every binder. And if the PI didn't, then it's their CRA's responsibility to train the site at that visit. So then the CRA, you would bring the coordinator in and hopefully at the same time have the PI there. If not, then you have to train the PI at a different time on the amendment. And then you could document that in the log. There should be a protocol training log in there. So that's a finding, and that's actually a good interview question. So are you familiar with the STAR technique, the STAR method of
Yes, I've read about it.
Yeah, did Sinead talked about it in the class?
Yes, she did. Yeah.
I think one of the weeks she gets into that a little bit. I don't know which week. It might be week 8.
7 or 8.
Yeah?
That's 7 or 8.
So STAR is not just used in research, it's used in any industry.
Even for interview.
Yeah, it's interview techniques that the interviewer uses. And they're never going to tell you, I'm using the STAR method. They're just going to do it. So what it is situation, and then it's a task, action, and response or result.
Like what you did to resolve
So what the interviewer will ask you, like the thing we just talked about, right? Protocol amendments. Let's say you get lucky and they ask you that. They're just going to paint the situation. You go to the site, and the site, there's been a protocol amendment, but you notice the site hasn't trained. They don't have an updated training log on the new amendment. What do you do? So they gave you the S of the STAR, and your job's to give them the TAR. And anyone who has any amount of experience, they're going to ask you things that they expect you have dealt with in your previous job based on the experience you put on your resume and the experience they require. So 2 years, you've probably seen everything, or at least 80% of the issues you've seen, right? Like Jesse's been here, 6 months? You've already seen like probably 80% of issues, like when monitors bring them up.
Yeah.
Right? So 2 years, you're going to see a lot, if not everything, right? So protocol amendment, if you're a CRA, and the interviewer is going to ask you, and there may not be a right answer, like there may be multiple right answers, but they want to see your thought process, and they want to see if you're comfortable dealing with these situations. So the task, action, and result. So if I were asked that, or presented with that situation, then I'm there for the interview, I would say, well, and you can even spell it out and they'll know what you're doing and they might think that that's a good thing,
Oh.
right? You can say, well, my task was to train the staff, especially the coordinator and the PI, on the new amendment and document it. My action was, that's exactly what I did. I brought them together separately, whatever the case was, and I documented it in the protocol training log. And then the result was that they then went on and trained all the other staff on the delegation log, because every staff member needs to be trained.
Yeah, right.
So you may not be able to train all of them. Maybe you're just there to meet with the coordinator and the PI. Maybe the sub-Is are not there. Very often they're not there. But everyone on the delegation log and on the 1572 has to sign that training document. So you can train the people there if they're missing that training, and then for your next monitoring visit, it's going to be an action item. PI to train other staff member, and you name them. Doctor so-and-so, nurse so-and-so, study coordinator so-and-so on protocol amendment number, whatever the number was. So that's why I look at reg binder first. And then any new staff members, same thing, like since your last visit, if there's been someone new added to the delegation log, they need to be trained on the protocol. They need to have GCP training. They need to have, if they're shipping lab samples, IATA training, right? So that's something else you look into. And you can either choose to train them if they're there, or it's an action item for you to have the PI train them prior to your next visit. That's why I look at that. Now, another reason why I look at that is sometimes the protocol amendments trigger an informed consent amendment. And if that's not done properly, that's a safety issue for patients. Like if it actually is enough to warrant the site losing the study if it's done a number of times. Because sometimes protocol amendments, if they change a procedure or they add something or they take something out that will impact the patient, they have to be reconsented with the latest amendment. And oftentimes you're going to find that sites forget to reconsent with the new amendment. And that's your job to find out.
So they have to sign a new. I see it.
So that's another star, right? There's a protocol amendment since your last monitoring visit. What are the things that you do as a CRA? That's it. So you can talk about training the staff, but you should also bring up.
So
Yeah.
the first thing I want to do is if the subjects are signed the new ICF.
Yes. And if you look in the report, there's like a list, and then there's a ICF version, and then a date that they signed, and then comments. So the comments would be,
Okay.
Either they need to reconsent or they did reconsent, right? So if let's say subject 1, let's say there's only one subject 1, and there's like 3 different informed consents.
Version
You'll have that subject 3 times,
signed.
and then each version and each date, and then comments. Like, this was done on time according to protocol. This was done late, and it was triggered by an action item by the CRA. And that's another thing I was telling Monica. On these reports, you never put I did, I said. It's always the CRA. So, for example, investigator continues to fulfill obligations. I mean, you'll never check no unless you have good reason. Like, let's say the PI has 0 oversight. Like, they're not signing lab results. They're not meeting with you. Everything's the coordinator. There's no progress note. There's no training, nothing signed. Well, that would be a no. The PI is not meeting obligations.
Yeah.
And let's say you even talk to the PI about that, and it's still an issue at your next visit. Obviously, that would be a no, right? But that's very rare, but it does happen, right? But if it does, then you have a lengthy comments about that, and the ramifications are big for the site because they're probably going to be dropped from the study. And the sponsor might even be obligated to contact the FDA and the IRB for patient safety. Very strict. Same thing with the site personnel. Adequate time to fulfill obligations, yes or no. Number 3 is a big one. It could be a star scenario. So, are the investigators, site personnel performing the functions as outlined on the delegation log, right? So that's another reason why I look at the reg binder first. The delegation log has like numbers or letters by each person of what they can do. So if you notice that someone's doing something that they're not delegated to do, either the PI needs to delegate that task to them, or they shouldn't be doing it, right? And you need to find out which one it is. Then if you notice someone that's on the delegation log doing something and they're not on the delegation log for that, that's a situation. Like,
Right.
What's the task, action, and result? Or let's say you see the study coordinator dispensing the medication. Typically that's allowed, but if it's an injection and you see the coordinator doing it and they're not qualified to do that, like, what do you do as a CRA, right? That'll be a star
Yeah.
scenario.
I think the first thing I want to do is check the delegation log if they have been delegated to do so.
Yes.
If they have not, then I will have to talk to the PI about
Yep.
it.
You have to find out if they should be doing it or if they shouldn't.
Right.
Okay.
Either way, it's an issue. Either you need to like add them to do it, or it's now kind of a protocol deviation and maybe a safety issue if the coordinator is doing something they're not authorized to do, right? So that's another one. Do the study facilities continue to be acceptable? So that has to do with primarily with source document storage and investigational product storage. So you guys know about temperature excursions with investigational products? So that's another star question, right? You go to a site. I've been asked this one at an interview. You go to a site and you notice there's been a temperature excursion a couple weeks ago, but the site didn't even realize it. So what do? Well, quarantine. Yes,
Yeah.
you're right. You're right. Exactly. But what else do you do?
Well, you probably need to verify the temperature to make sure what it should be,
Mm-hmm.
and then let the site coordinator know or the PI that this is outside of it's a deviation, and to
Mm-hmm.
bring it up to what it needs to be.
But what if since that excursion happened and your visit, 4 patients have already come in and gotten new meds?
Oh, I'll have them call the patients right away to stop taking the meds.
Yes.
Yeah.
And they might have to be withdrawn from the study. So even if it's like 1 degree off, it sounds ridiculous, but it's like a huge issue.
Mhm.
They have to follow you know how every medication bottle has a range,
Yeah.
like 59 to 77. Well, let's say it's 78, right? It's not going to really do anything to the drug. But in research, it's like it's invalid. Like,
Because it's out of what the protocol
Mhm.
says. So that's a protocol deviation.
not only is it invalid, you're right. Not only is it invalid, it's a safety issue, and the IRB will probably audit that site. Those patients may not be allowed to continue because they've been taking uncontrolled IP, right? And quarantine, you're right. So with a quarantine, you take all the IP and you send it back to the sponsor. There's a process to do that. And then the site will be given new medication. And now another thing you can add is the PI will discuss with the medical monitor. Thank you. The PI will discuss with the medical monitor what should be the course of action going forward for the patients that did take the medication. Sometimes the medical monitor will allow them to continue. Other times they'll say no. They have to all be withdrawn and come in for an early termination visit. And so they'll come in, they'll return all their meds. The site has to call them and tell them to stop taking it that day and come in ASAP to do your early term visit and just for like safety assessments. And that's it. They'll be done, and that's obviously not a good look for the site. So temperature excursions are big. That's very important. You won't